So my name is Jorge. Um, Start that over. I'm sorry, and I won't do this often. I just want to say, it's funny because my legal name is George with a G, but I've always used Jorge professionally, so it's a long story. So, but I'll say Jorge Plasencia. Let me start. My name is Jorge Plasencia, and I was born here in Miami, actually in the city of Coral Gables at Doctors Hospital, right by the University of Miami.
Around the corner from where we are
Right
today.
around the corner from where we're at right now,
That's
absolutely.
very funny. What area did you grow up in Miami? What was Miami like as a kid of Cuban parents?
So I was born in 74, right? So I was born in June of 74. And, back then, Miami was a very different place than it is today. We're filming this obviously in 2025, and Miami today is a metropolitan city, one of the coolest places I think on the planet, right? But back then it wasn't that. Back then, if I think back, my parents they both left Cuba in '61, and they ended up meeting here in Miami in around 70, around 1970. I was born in 74. And if you think back to that time, Miami was a very different place. It was, from what I've learned, it was a beach town. It was a retirement community on the beach and cow pasture. I mean, it was really what today is 57th Avenue, 67th Avenue, back then was out west. That was pretty far west back then. And from there, towards the Everglades, again, there was nothing there, right? So what this place has become in my lifetime is pretty extraordinary. But I think back to our parents when they got here in the early '60s, and how difficult it must have been, right? Because they weren't received with open doors by many, right? Yes, the Catholic Church did, and others, but they weren't received with open arms, because obviously it was this influx of people coming over with a different language and different backgrounds and custom, and people fleeing their country. And it must have been really, really hard for our parents and grandparents during that time, right? That moment in time, which we could talk more about. But
Yeah. Tell me what your family life was like. What part of town did you grow up in? Did you have any siblings?
yeah,
What did your parents do for a living?
so I grew up. My father was a CPA from Cuba. His family was a tobacco family from Canary Islands that then settled in Pinal del Rio, Vuelta Abajo, which is one of the most beautiful places for tobacco, right, on the planet. That's where my father grew up. He grew up on a tobacco farm, and I'm proud to say today the Plasencia brand, the Plasencia Cigars brand, is synonymous with some of the world's best tobacco today, grown by my cousins in Nicaragua and Honduras. But it was started by my great-grandfather in Pinal del Rio. So my father was one of 8 siblings, and they each had careers. My father was a CPA. He had a brother who was a lawyer, teacher, sister was a teacher, all that. And he ended up running the branch in Havana for the trust company. The trust company was like one of the top banks in Havana. My father ran the branch in Havana, and the day that banks were nationalized by Castro, he left. He left and ended up going to Venezuela, where he had a cousin that lived in Venezuela, and he took a job in Venezuela as an auditor for British Tobacco. He was there for a year trying to land a job in Miami in banking. That was really hard at the time to land jobs in banking in Miami. So he ended up with a corresponding bank that he used to work with when he was in Havana, in Houston. He ended up getting a job in Houston at this bank, and was at this bank till '68, when he finally landed a job here in Miami at Republic National Bank. Republic National Bank was the bank that would lend money to Cubans on a handshake. They were called character loans, and these were loans based on the reputation and the credit history that you had in Cuba. And a lot of our very successful big businesses here in South Florida and other places that's how they started. That's how they started. And I'm proud to say that many families and entrepreneurs and people are very grateful to my father, may he rest in peace, because he believed in them early on. So I say the story about my father, a banker. He ended up working at Republic National Bank. That's where the name of my company comes from. We could talk about that. It's an ode to my dad and an honor in honoring him. And then my mother, my grandfather on my mom's side, I had entrepreneurs on both sides. My grandfather on my mom's side he owned 3 of the main territories for Gawi, which Gawi was a refreshment, a lemon lime soda on the island. So my grandfather owned the Havana and a few other parts of Cuba. And, again, when Castro seized all that and they left Cuba, he started anew here in Miami. Ended up dying of a massive heart attack in '65. Couldn't take the pressure, right? So he had lost everything, couldn't take the pressure. So my mother, when she got here, she was the eldest of 5 kids. She worked 3 jobs to provide for her family. So my mom, when I was a little boy, my parents met, had me. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. So my dad was a banker, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she was very involved in my school, very involved in the PTA, very involved in serving lunch in the cafeteria, doing all those things that, room mother, doing all those things that some moms get to do. And she was a very present mother when I was a kid. And she, later in life, probably in her early 40s, ended up getting her real estate license and became a very successful realtor in Coral Gables, on Miami Beach. You asked me about where I grew up. So as a little boy, we lived here in Coral Gables. We lived not too far from the University of Miami, actually a home where last year my mother passed in that home. So it's a home not too far from here, from the University of Miami. And we lived there until I was 8. When I was 8, I always say my parents were avant-garde for the time. They ended up buying a home in Miami Beach on Venetian Causeway. And I lived there. My brother and I, we had a really special upbringing because, we were able to be on Miami Beach when Miami Beach was a very different Miami Beach than it is today, right? Back then it was quieter. You still had the little older people on rocking chairs on Ocean Drive. And I remember vividly, I was probably about 12, 13 years old when the Carlisle first opened up, which that was kind of like the first hotel on Ocean Drive that started changing what Ocean Drive became, right? What it became, where it became this mecca of entertainment. But I remember living that as a little boy. So went to Catholic school my whole life. My parents were both very faithful, in regard to their faith and Catholic faith. So, as a little boy, went to school here at St. Teresa, Coral Gables, and then St. Patrick's on Miami Beach, went in 4th grade, and then went to high school at LaSalle in Coconut Grove. So that was kind of my upbringing. I have one brother, an older brother. His name is Emmanuel. We call him Manny. And, it was a home where there was a lot of love. There was a lot of connection, and there was a lot of family always around. And it was also a place where we were instilled not only values and on all those great things that your parents instill in you, but also a big love for our parents' homeland, for Cuba, and immense gratitude to this country for having taken them in. So it was always this juxtapose of the gratitude to the United States for being a harbor to take them in, but also a love and a longing for the place that they left behind, right? And years ago, I was in a documentary that Joe Cardona and Mario de Varona did called Café con Leche. I was in Café con Leche 1 and 2. And in that, I say that, for us, it's for kids of my generation, right? that haven't been to Cuba, it's kind of a Cuba of the mind. And what we know as Cuba is Miami, right? And our experiences here, and our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, and the person that works at the restaurant, and or whatever, or the music, or what have you. That is our experience of Cuba, right? And but I was brought up, again, very proud to be Cuban American. It's a long answer to your question. My apologies. I know I went around in different places.
No, that's great. No, that's great. Did you, growing up, did you feel Cuban? Did you feel American? Did you feel distinctly the two?
I knew I was Cuban American, right? When I really, and it's a great question, when I really connected with the fact that I was Cuban, like that it was a plus to be Cuban American, right? My brother's older than me, and a lot of people of his generation had to shun their Latin heritage or their Cuban heritage or what have you, right? They had to assimilate, and I think my generation was the one, and I think to that documentary's credit, it was kind of like an awakening. Café con Leche was an awakening for my generation and younger of, man, we're special. We have this kind of, we have this duality, right, of being Cuban and American. And I'm telling you, that documentary was 1997, I want to say. I was working at the Marlins, so it was 97, I think. That documentary, I think, was just key to having us connect to who we were, and to being proud of who we were. And yes, I always knew, growing up in a Cuban home, you know that you're different than your neighbors that are Anglo, right? Your customs are different, your homes are different, everything's kind of different, but you don't understand it, right? But once we came together, and I think it was like, I forget how many of us, but maybe 15 of us, and we all had these similar stories, and we all had the same kind of connective tissue, right, as Cuban Americans. I think that was the moment where I was like, wow, yes, I'm Cuban American. So to answer your question, I always knew that, yes, my family was Cuban, but the pride of being Cuban American that I feel today, it ignited when I was probably in my early 20s.
Interesting.
In my early 20s.
You always an ambitious guy, and started. Am I right that
I don't know if the word is ambitious, but
no, smart then.
no, definitely not smart. Definitely not. No, but I don't know if the word's ambitious, and I don't say it in a bad way. I just
what I'm getting at specifically is like, did you co-found Amigos for Kids when you were 17?
17.
And which is the first organization. I mean, you've gone on to do so many things, but that's kind of where I'm jumping
Sure.
to. Tell me a little bit about. Let's jump ahead to those teen years,
Sure.
and like what makes you decide that.
So thank you. Yeah. So Amigos for Kids. I've been asked the question. What are you most proud of in your life or career? And I always say Amigos for Kids. I've done different things, but Amigos for Kids is the thing that really always tugs at my heart. And I was at St. Patrick's School on Miami Beach. It was a school back then, probably still is today, that was very involved in community. And we had a service club. And I was always a very outgoing kid, always involved in things. So I became a member of the service club, and the service club would go out and we'd do different things for the community. And one of the things that we'd do was in Halloween and in Christmas, we would go to a shelter near Jackson Memorial Hospital here in Miami called the Macklemore Children's Center, part of the Children's Home Society. And it's a shelter where children that have been abused, abandoned, neglected, removed from their homes and taken to this place. And I remember seeing kids my age and me thinking to myself, how is it that I didn't even know what abuse was. Thankfully, I never experienced that, at my home. But I was like, how can this be, right? That these kids don't have the same love from their parents that I did. It was just very confusing to me. And so I would volunteer there a lot. I ended up becoming the president of the service club at St. Patrick's School when I was in 7th grade. And I remember thinking to myself and telling my parents, when I grow up, I want to do something for these kids. I want to do something because it's not fair that these kids, and don't have a voice and they don't have love. Anyway, long story short, I was 17. I had been volunteering for an organization that I had been volunteering for Children's Home Society, actually. And at the time, Children's Home Society, if you think back to 1991, 34 years ago, Children's Home Society was a wonderful organization, but it was a very Anglo organization. Its support, its leadership, everybody was very Anglo. And nothing wrong with that, but I was volunteering and we talked about, why don't we start a Hispanic auxiliary of Children's Home Society, like a group of us that can help and bring people from the Hispanic community to help Children's Home Society. So the original name of Amigos was Amigos of Children's Home Society. I haven't told the story much, but the original name was Amigos of Children's Home Society, and we were kind of like a chapter of Latinos, mostly Cubans, helping Children's Home Society. Well, you remember what happened August 24th of 1992 here, which was Hurricane Andrew. Hurricane Andrew changed this community forever, right? And I remember I was 18 at the time, and I remember it was a beautiful moment because it was the first time that I really experienced people helping each other, right? And no badges, just we're in it we're in this together, right? So after that, several homes for foster homes and what have you were destroyed by the hurricane. So there was so much need in Miami in the child welfare community that group of Amigos of Children's Home Society, we said, why don't we branch off and start our own nonprofit, our own 501c3. And it was pretty much four of us that started what then became Amigos. Originally our name was Amigos Together for Kids. And then probably in the early 2000s, we rebranded it as Amigos for Kids. It was a dear friend, his name was Footy from Y100, a very well-known radio personality here in Miami, a wonderful guy, that I remember one day I was on his morning show and he's like, George, Amigos Together for Kids, that's a mouthful. And this is on the air. He goes, us Anglos, we like stuff that's short. Why so long? And I said to Footy on the air, I said, how about Amigos for Kids? He goes, I love that. And that's where the shorter name came from. But so to answer your question, so it was 1991. I was 17 when we started Amigos of Children's Home Society. Then 92, we branched off and started our own 501c3, which became what is today Amigos for Kids. And we just started helping. We started helping organizations and kids in need. And I'm proud to say today, 34 years later, the organization is by far one of South Florida's preeminent organizations that work with under-resourced children and families, that fights child abuse, that works with parents, and we have parenting programs, we have after-school programs, we have programs with the school system. We have all sorts of programs. We have an incredible staff, incredible leadership, an incredible volunteer board, and I think, over these years, over 30 years, the four of us that started over the years for different reasons, I was the one that kind of stayed along, right? For different reasons, they got sick, whatever happened, right? I retired, but I was the one that over these years kind of stayed involved from the beginning. And, like I say, for all these years, I've just been one more volunteer that has just tried my best to keep the organization going. But it is a true gem, I think, of Miami and of this community. And what's interesting about it is it's really one of the few organizations that was started by our generation, right? Because you had organizations here like La Liga contra el Cáncer, which is a wonderful organization that was started by my mother's generation, right? Because that was an offshoot of La Liga contra el Cáncer that there was in Cuba. So they, in Cubans, we've always been very focused on cancer, helping with cancer research and cancer care. But from my generation, Amigos for Kids was really the organization, I think, that has been nonprofit-wise one of the defining organizations of people my age and younger. And we've had a lot of support over these years, and we have, like I said, an incredible board.
I mean, that's an incredible thing to start at such a young age. But so maybe ambition is not the right word, but you certainly had, you knew you wanted to do things, right? And you wanted to help others, and you also had aspirations in your own life. And so I'd love to talk about what some of those early professional aspirations were. That I read that you got Entrepreneur of the Year from Ernst and Young early on. But talk to me. You're done at St. Patrick's,
Yeah.
college, job. What comes next?
So, I had a very unorthodox kind of career, and I say that because, so I was like I said, like they would say, there's a Spanish saying for kids that are, what's the word,
Rambunctious.
rambunctious, con una bola de humo. I was una bola de humo as a kid. I was like nonstop. It's funny when I say that today, people are like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah, that was me." But because I was like that, my dad, who, as I said earlier, was a banker. He was a top executive at Republic National Bank, and he was very involved in the community, getting the bank involved in the community. This was again in the 80s, right? And it was the summer before freshman year of high school. And my dad says, "Hey, we're sponsoring a radiothon at Radio Mambi on Coral Way, and it's a radiothon for the National Parkinson Foundation that the bank is sponsoring, and we need volunteers to answer the phones at the radio station." He said, "Can you do that? I want you to do this." And I said, "Sure." So I had to be there all day, answering the phones, getting the pledges, writing other people's addresses, whatever. But as I was there doing that, imagine, I was, how old are you when you're about to go into a freshman year? So 14?
14.
I was 14. Imagine a 14-year-old kid today going into the Spotify offices or into some other, it was, walking into that radio station back then, it was, because Radio Mambi was the AM station, but it also had an FM station. And I remember walking in and being like, man, this is really cool. I just love the atmosphere in here, and I love this, I love the vibe. And I remember coming home that night and my brother saying, well, if you love this so much, at some point you should ask for an internship. Obviously, internship is something you do later in life, right? Like when you're in college, right? So, usually. But I remember one day, and I haven't said this story much. One day I'm driving down Coral Way. My mother's driving, and I'm in the car with her. I'm at this point probably maybe a month after. It was still the summer before freshman year. And I said to my mom, "You know what, Mom? I want you to stop me at Radio Mambi." And she goes, "For what?" And I said, "No, I want to get down and I want to speak to Mr. Perez Roda," because I had heard that he was the director. And I said, "I want to ask for an internship." And my mother said to me, "Well, I'll stop you, but hey, he's a very busy man. That guy is very important." And I said, "Well, it doesn't hurt for me to go in." So my mother, may she rest in peace, waited for me in the car, and I got down. And I went into the lobby, and I will never forget Alicia, the receptionist that was there for years. I said to her, in Spanish, I said, "Quisiera ver al señor Perez Roda." Imagine, I'm a 14-year-old kid. And she goes to me, "¿Usted tiene appointment? Do you have an appointment?" And I said, "No, pero," I said, "I was here recently volunteering at the Radiothon, and I want to talk to him because I want an internship." So she looks at me like, okay, this is the first, a kid walking in. So she calls Grisel Fernandez, his assistant, out. And she comes out to the lobby to meet me, and I said, "Hi, estoy aquí. Mi nombre es Jorge Plasencia, and I'd like an internship." And she goes to me, "Jorge Plasencia, ¿qué tú eres de Plasencia el banquero? What are you, Plasencia the banker?" And I said, very proud, I said, "That's my father." She goes, "That's my husband's banker." And then she says, "Mira," because if I ended up working there, you would know that Perez Roda, he was there till about 1 o'clock. He'd do a noticiero al mediodía, the noon newscast, and then he'd go home for the afternoon, and then he'd come back because he would do La Mesa Redonda at 6, this radio show. So she goes, "Perez Roda no está aquí, él regresa por la tarde. He's not here, he'll be back around 6. She goes, "If you want, come back tomorrow morning so you can see him." So my mother, again, she's amazing. She took me back the next morning. And when I met with Perez Roda, he said to me, "Look, I've never been asked, a kid your age has never come ask me for an internship." He said, "But if you want to learn, And I said, yeah, I don't need to get paid. I just want to learn. And he said, sure, you could start today. And he also knew my father, but I didn't use my dad's influence or his name or anything. It's just the fact that I have the same name. And he goes, I highly respect your father. He's a good man, blah, blah, blah. So I ended up starting at the radio station that day. I went out to the car and told my mom, Mom, they're saying that I could start today. She goes, really? She goes, and then I said, come back like at 5 o'clock to pick me up. So my mother was amazing, and she came back later to pick me up. But that first day, I'll never forget, Pedroda took me into the newsroom. And it was this newsroom at a radio station. It wasn't a very exciting newsroom, but it was a newsroom. And my job was back then, this was before, computers like we have today. The news would come in on these cables, on these printers. And you had to get the papers off these printers, cut them, and get them ready for the newsreaders to read the news. And I remember doing that for a week, and I was like, oh my God, I don't like doing this, right? But I was an intern, but I was doing it. And then one day, I finally get the courage to walk into the FM radio side, where they would play music, and it was hipper and all that, right? And I start going in there. Fast forward, I ended up doing my internship pretty much with them and Pedroda, right? But I was on the music side more. And then I start school, freshman year, and I ended up getting a job there. So a lot of kids weren't working, or if they were working at Burger King or whatever. I was working at the radio station. So I ended up working there all throughout high school. I would work after school sometimes. I'd work on weekends sometimes. I'd work summers, of course. And I started from the bottom up. I did everything at that radio station, from working in filing, to going out on the street with the reporters, to what I did for the longest time is I was in promotions. So I was one of the guys that was driving the van to remotes at car dealers and supermarkets, and serving the food and putting up the balloons, and making sure that the disc jockey would go live on time. And that was foundational, that time, for my career. And that's when I said earlier that I was kind of unorthodox. Not a lot of people start that young, right? But I kind of, thanks to that radiothon, and my dad said, do you want to answer phones? It kind of put me on this path, right, to where I am today. And, and when you said the word ambition, I think it's been more about being open to what comes your way, and putting one foot in front of the other, and being open to opportunities. I was at that radio station for 4 years. From that station, I went, competition. I graduated high school. Hurricane Andrew happened. I graduated high school that year. The radio station, we became, obviously, Amigos for Kids was a key. I talked about Amigos for Kids evolving during that time. But the radio station back then became one of the main centers after Hurricane Andrew to collect, all sorts of donations, right? So we had Mack trucks outside the radio station full of all sorts of stuff to send down south to Homestead in Florida City and the Redlands and all those areas. And I was involved in all that. I was involved in a lot of that work. And we ended up doing a concert at Emilio and Gloria. Estefan did a concert at the stadium called Hurricane Relief, which was phenomenal. We also did a concert called Miami por Miami, and it was at the old Miami Arena, and it was kind of all the Latin artists. And all the money we raised was to go to, so I did all that from that, and then from that radio station, I went to the competitor. The competitor hired me away, paying me more money. So I would work and go to school at the same college, go to school at the same time. I worked all throughout college. So it took me a little longer to finish college because I was working full time. From that station, my manager at that station, her name is Claudia Puig, a well-known media a personality and an executive here in Miami. She was my boss. When I got to that station so the first station I worked for was owned by Amancio Suarez and his family, right? So that was a company called Viva America Media Group. They owned Radio Mambi, Radio Ritmo. Giving you some media history here. From there, I went to go work for their competitor, which was WQA. La Cubanísima y Super Cool, right? That was owned by Heftel Broadcasting Corporation. The general manager was Herb Levin. I get to work there, and I was in promotions. I was a promotions manager. The sales manager was Claudia Puig. So I start working with her, and even how I got to that station was another story that I can tell at some point of how I got there. But anyway, Claudia, I started working with her, and I earned her trust. And about 3 years after we were there, another competitor hired her away, and she told the which is SBS, Raúl Alarcón, hired her away. She said, "I'll go, but only if I can take my key people." And she ended up taking me with her to that place, to SBS. At SBS, I was there for a few years, did really well there. I was in charge at the time. SBS had the rights for the Miami Dolphins, Florida Panthers, Florida Marlins. I was the guy. I was in charge of promotion, but I was also in charge of the relationship between SBS and Huizenga Holdings, Wayne Huizenga's team. Fast forward, they ended up hiring me away, and I became the first director of Hispanic marketing in Major League Baseball for the Florida Marlins, today the Miami Marlins, but back then the Florida Marlins. So I was at the Marlins, was very lucky that the time I was there, the team went to the World Series and won the World Series. I was named the guy to by my bosses there. So I was doing the whole Hispanic marketing thing, which went really well. We got very success with the Marlins in that. But from there, hold on a second. Marlins. I was there, did really well, and from there is when Wayne Huizenga, during the '97 World Series, people may remember that he said, "This is all fine and dandy, but I'm going to sell the team. You know, I've lost a lot of money. I'm going to sell the team," and that's when I went to go work for Gloria and Emilio Estefan. And there's a whole other story there about how that happened. And then I was with them for a little less than 5 years, then I went back to media, but now at a company that ended up getting acquired by Univision Radio. And then from there, I was there for 5 years. And then 18 years ago, started my own company, Republica Habas. So that answers that question. A very long answer, sorry.
No, but a very long answer for a storied career. So, and I mean, I hear.
And I started the company, I should say, with my business partner, Luis Casamayor, right? So he's more for the creative side, I'm more the other side, the kind of strategy client side. Yeah.
I hear when you say why you say open to possibilities, because it seems like when there was something presented and you were like, wait, this is a great opportunity.
I was never looking. It just came to me, right? And I was open to it, right?
So it seems like the first kind of major departure from what you were doing in some ways was when you went, radio to the Marlins made sense because you were already working with the Marlins, but now you go from the Marlins to work for Gloria and Emilio Estefan at Estefan Enterprises. So that seems to be kind of the biggest almost shift, because now you're going away from promotions, you're going into like music production, among the many things that the Estefans were doing at that time, which is late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I got to them. The World Series was in '97. I started there probably November of '97. So it was right after the World Series.
How did that happen?
One of the local papers, I remember because they started trading players, right? And one of the papers, they reported, first front office defection. And it was me to go to the Estefans. And how did that happen? So I had met the Estefans. Imagine working in radio. At some point you had to meet. I had the privilege of meeting a lot of La Gloria de Cuba, a lot of our legends of Cuba, right? So I got to meet names like Celia. And Celia was a dear friend. Olga Guillot ended up being my neighbor on the beach. Rolando La Serie. So many people that I had Alvarejedes. So many people that I had the privilege of getting to know well since I was a kid, right? They knew me as a kid and growing up. So I was around a lot of these people. So the Estefans were, I had met them early in my career, right? I had met them. I had met John Cicada, Albita. I had met them early in my career. And it's interesting because I always had a connection to them and a friendship. And a friend, Loreta Anaya, who was in sales at You know, when I was saying earlier about how I got to that station, it was to Cubanísima. She was working there. She had worked with me. She knew my family. Long story short, that's how I got there. Loretta would tell me, "Tú vas a trabajar para los Estefan algún día. You're going to work for them one day." And I would say, "Why do you say that?" You know, and then, no, I don't know. You're going to end up working there. Well, she foretold the future because it ended up happening. And how did it happen? So when I got, and it's a very cool question of a really special story. When I got to the Marlins, imagine, so I get hired from the radio station. They create this role for me, Director of Hispanic Marketing. Why did they create the role? Because the team, if you remember, it started in 93. This was 96 at this point, starting the 97 season. The team had been around, but the stadium at the time was Joe Robbie Stadium, which then became Pro Player Stadium, was so far north. If you lived in, you know, Little Havana, Westchester, Kendall, even Hialeah, it was far, right? And today it doesn't seem that far. Back then, it was far. And, you know, getting people, you know, Hispanics would listen to the games on radio, but it was hard, and Cubans, but it was hard to get them to come to games because it was so far. So I was brought in to find ways to create that connection between the team and the community. They had really never, aside from our radio stations where I worked, they had really never catered to the community. So Jim Ross, who at the time had been brought on as Vice President of Marketing, he was my client. You know, he was the guy at the Marlins that I would deal with day to day when I was at SBS. And one day I got a call from him and he said, you know, we want to create this role and we think you'd be perfect for it. Imagine, I was still in college. I was 23, 24 years old, 23. And I remember saying to him, Jim, you know, I'm flattered, but, you know, I've never been a marketing director. And he said, you could do it. All kidding aside, I went to Barnes & Noble on Miracle Mile and I bought How to Create a Marketing Plan book because I was still in college, right? Well, and I ended up, because imagine, he hires me and he's one of these guys and he's one of my dearest friends today. His wife works with us at República. They live in Aspen, but they're dear friends of mine. But he then became the head of marketing at the Dolphins and then at the Yankees. He's had a storied career. But he was one of these people, he taught me a lot. And he said, I will never forget, he goes, hey, I need a marketing plan from you of what you're going to do with the department. I need it in 2 weeks. Imagine, I had never done that. So I went and did it. I'm proud to say that fast forward, we ended up winning Hispanic Marketer of the Year. There was an award that would be given out back then, and we won Hispanic Marketer of the Year. And I ended up doing all sorts of things to connect the Marlins with the community, right? And I even brought in, you know, with the help of colleagues, brought in sponsors, like El Dorado Furniture became a sponsor, things like that had never been done before. So you asked me about Gloria and Emilio. One of my first weeks on the job at the Marlins, Jim's boss, Don Smiley, who was the CEO of the team, I'll never forget, calls me into his office and he's like, hey, you know all these Latin people, you know, you come from the Latin world. Do you know Gloria Estefan? And I said, well, you know, yeah, I mean, I know them, of course. And he said, well, you know, we're going into our 5th season and we've been trying to get Gloria to come sing an anthem at a game. At a Marlins game. But, you know, she was on tour. She just did the 96 Olympics with that song Reach. You know, it's been hard to pin her down. And I said, well, she's always on the road. She's always traveling. And he goes, well, do you think you can land Gloria for us? Imagine, this is a CEO asking you this and you just started. And I said, well, I don't know, but I can try. You know, I can try. I can't promise you anything, but I can definitely try. Never forget. I called Estefan Enterprises. This is before I had Emilio's cell phone number, which back then cell phones were those big bricks. But, you know, and his assistant at the time, Patty, she connected me to him. And I said, Emilio, you know, I'm calling because, you know, I'm now working for the Marlins, would love to invite you guys to come out to a game. But, you know, I hear that, you know, we've been trying to get Gloria to come sing an anthem at a game and it's been hard. He goes, imagine, George, we've been on tour. We just did the Olympics. He goes, you know, by the way, I was talking to him, he was in Japan. He goes, we're in Japan now. And he goes to me, no, we're going to be back this summer. He goes, but look, and this is like, listen to what he said to me, pie in the sky. He goes to me, but look, and the season hasn't even begun yet. And he says to me, oye, pero te voy a decir algo. Si ustedes llegan a la Serie Mundial, tienes a Gloria. But that's like saying, if you win the lotto, you have glory, right? The odds are, and I was like, ha 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 ha. And he goes, no, he goes, let's touch base when we're back over the summer, right? So fast forward, the team starts winning, right? And we start winning on the field, and we start winning, and we start winning, and we're about to clinch the division series, right? And I was like, man, this is crazy, right? So then we clinch the division series, we win the division, then the league championship series, we win that. Look, I still get goosebumps as I'm saying the story. And when we're about to go into the World Series, I called Emilio. And I said, hey, buddy, you remember what you said to me? He goes, yeah. I go, well, have you been following the team? He goes, yeah, man, you guys are killing it. And I said, yeah. And I said, well, no, a promise is a promise. And he said, oh, of course, absolutely. Now we're back from tour, right? But he goes, yeah, absolutely. So not only were we able to get Gloria, at the time, we wanted her to sing Game 1 of the World Series. But Major League Baseball at the time was trying to bring kids into the game. So they said, we'd like Hanson to sing Game 1. So they sang the anthem Game 1. Gloria sang it Game 2, performed it Game 2. And then I invited them obviously to come back during the posts, during the World Series. And one night we're there, and it was the day that I had gone to pick up Livang Hernandez's mother. I had gone to pick up Livang Hernandez's mother at the airport. I don't know if you remember, but those watching can Google this and you'll see the videos and what have you. But Livang Hernandez had left Cuba and hadn't seen his mom in a long time. And we were able to get his mother to surprise him during the World Series and come come see him. So I went to the plane on the tarmac to pick her up at Miami International Airport. She was in my Jeep Grand Cherokee, drove her to the home of Hall of Famer Tony Perez and his wife Pituca, where we kind of hung out for a bit until we got to the stadium, where hundreds of cameras were waiting for us. And that moment that I witnessed between him and his mother is a moment I will never forget, the embrace in private of Livang and his mother. And so that was that earlier that day. That night, Gloria and Emilio were in Mr. Huizinga's suite. Mr. Huizinga had just announced that he was going to be selling the team. This is during the World Series. And I remember them saying to me, Jorge, you've been a part of all of this. You've been a part of, we had won the Hispanic Market of the Year, all these things. I had been named the guy to lead. That was the other thing that I should have mentioned. Don Smiley, the CEO, and Jim Ross named me the guy to lead all entertainment and hospitality around the postseason. So I was the guy in charge of all the anthem singers, the ticker tape parade, all of the parties at the stadium, everything. Me, a colleague, and I were in charge of that. Patty Sweeney and I were in charge of all that. And that night, they said to me, hey, you've been a part of all this. What are you going to do? Are you going to stay here? And I said, look, if they're going to dismantle the team, I'm not going to stay here, right? I want to be part of the glorious times of this place. And they said to me, well, we should talk. We're now back from tour. We're going to be focusing on other artists. The focus isn't going to be solely Gloria's career anymore, which it didn't, it wasn't anymore. It was kind of scaled to other artists. And, we really need to start a marketing function at Estefan Enterprises. They had started to, we're in the process of opening up Bongo's Cuban Cafe at Walt Disney World. They had just bought the Cardozo Hotel on the beach. They had the music publishing side, the record label. So they needed, a marketing. So I went and met with Emilio and them on the beach at their office. And, they made me this offer to go there as their first director of marketing. And you know what? I thought about it. And, like you said, again, it wasn't like the common next step, right? Because I had been in all these other things. But I've always been a sponge for learning and for taking on new things. Every role that I've had, for the most part, in my career, I created the role. It didn't exist beforehand. My role at the different places that I've talked about, the role that, including the Marlins, the role didn't exist. So I started so I ended up leaving the Marlins, and and going to Estefan Enterprises as director of marketing. I was at Estefan. I got there, like I said, at the end of '97, and we were really, Estefan Enterprises had been around for a long time, but it was mostly managing Gloria's career and John Cicada, right? That was mostly Estefan Enterprises. They were, at the time, starting to work also, they had been working with Albita. Emilio had started producing for other artists. He had done some work for Alejandro Fernandez and Thalia. But it was really the moment where we were going to start evolving. And I'm proud to tell you that I was part of that moment in time, right? Which we were a Latin Motown at the time. We were either managing or producing all the major talent, from Jennifer Lopez, Mark Anthony, Ricky Martin, Thalia, Alejandro Fernandez, all these people, to managing Shakira and Carlos Ponce and others. Shakira, I remember the day that she first came to meet with us. She came with her manager from Colombia and her parents. And, Shakira, she's probably 3 years younger than me, right? So this was probably in 1998, and 98, 99. So, she was probably 20, 21. And you just felt the presence of greatness when you were with her, right? You knew that this girl was going to make it really far. And Emilio, obviously, he knew the secret sauce to crossover, And at the time at Sony, you had somebody like Tommy Mottola and others that believed in Latin music. And I'm proud to say that, Emilio became her manager. I became her day-to-day person, so her day-to-day guy. And what that means is, if you're the day-to-day, there's the manager, but then there's the person that kind of works day-to-day with the artist on making everything come true for, the music side and the touring side and the sponsorship side. So again, learning, using my common sense. I'd never done a lot of this, but it was just using my common sense. And like I was saying earlier, being open to things, putting one foot in front of the other. And, if I was on tour with Gloria, or I was traveling with Shakira, or if I was with any of our stable of talent, I was always learning, right? And I would tell you, from Shakira, I learned, she has an extraordinary work ethic, and she has an extraordinary just attention to excellence. Like, she wants everything excellent, right? And I admire that. From Gloria, I learned a lot of that, but I also learned a lot of humility. Gloria is just, she's always been very just who she is, right? So what I'm getting at with this is that, again, I was a sponge, learning all this. And at the time, Estefan Enterprises, as you can imagine, we were getting so much publicity, and it was so much going on with our music, and I was working there in 1999 when Ricky performed "The Cup of Life," which wasn't our song, but "The Cup of Life" on the Grammys. That was a turning point for Latin music, right? And we were producing a lot of that talent, right? So we were a mecca. And I was at the forefront of all that. I was at the forefront and got to live it all, and it was just a really cool time. And when you work at a company like Estefan Enterprises, which is still, it's this great place, but it's still very familial in how it operates. You wear different hats, right? So I was able to get into artist management, music publishing, the record label, the restaurants, the hotel. We had a publishing deal with, may he rest in peace, Jerry Powers and Ocean Drive. We launched Ocean Drive Español. We did so many things, right? We were open to so many things, and so many things happened that, again, I think it was formative, that time, to me, and I remember many times that I would be pinching myself like, man, I'm investing in myself during this time because I'm gaining so much knowledge. And and then the pride of working for, going around the world with them and seeing how they were respected and revered, how Gloria was beloved by fans everywhere, and how she would take the name or carry the torch of Cuban Americans and of Cuba worldwide. That was a very special time for me. I was even even there when Elian Gonzalez reached the shores of Miami. And imagine, I'm working there, and I wore different hats, and one of the hats I wore was I was spokesperson for Stefan Enterprises, and I led marketing, I had led artist management, I led a bunch of different things, but one of the things I led was PR. And imagine this little boy shows up on the shores, surrounded by dolphins. His mother had passed along the way. His father was in Cuba. He was taken to his family in Little Havana. And, for a while, we were watching it, kind of from a distance, of seeing how it was unfolding. And some time went by until one day I was at Gloria and Emilio's house, and that day Gloria said, let's go over there. And I called a dear friend. At the time, our mayor was Alex Pinellas. And, we knew him and his staff really well. He had a great team. And I called a dear friend that today works for the Marlins, Alfie Mesa. And I said, Alfie, confidentially, we're going to go out to the house today. And I said, I think we're going to need, some, getting there, because the streets were all blocked and there was thousands of people on the street all the time and all that. It was a really unique time in Miami. I said, I think we're going to need like some police help, right, to get there. And so they sent a police escort to us to Gloria and Emilio's home, and it followed us to kind of be able to get close to the house. And at these sorts of things, like when there's a big court case, all the cameramen are just sitting around, waiting for the moment, right, of getting that one shot, but they're like on lawn chairs just waiting, right? And, nobody knew we were coming. Only the mayor and Alfie and the police. No one knew. And I remember, we park about a block away, and we're walking, and the whole commotion's going on in front of the house. The cameramen are kind of, all the cameras are off, the lights are off, and then all of a sudden somebody screams, "Gloria Estefan!" All of a sudden, all the lights turned on, and they were following us down that street, because the street was closed off. They were following us down the street, and it was Gloria, Emilio, myself, and Mayor Pinellas was in the house already waiting for us. And it was surreal when I was inside that house with the family, the cousin, the uncle, and with Elian. And it was a very surreal moment. And then we went outside. Gloria went outside with the mayor, and it was interesting because a lot of artists that hadn't gone yet to the house, they showed up that day. It was very special. The media reported that Gloria and Emilio were there. So Andy showed up, and Albita, Arturo Sandoval, and it was a very special moment. We ended up doing, I'll never forget, a rosary outside. I have been blessed to be a part of incredible moments that are just ingrained in me, and that I'm proud to have played a little piece of, and that was one of the moments as I look back on my career that again, open to moments, and you don't plan for those things. You just So anyway, so that's a long answer to how did I work for Gloria and Emilio Estefan.
It's remarkable. It's a remarkable career.
And Emily was tiny at the time. I have many pictures carrying Emily. Naib was obviously very young, and to see what they've become too in their own right. And
I want to be mindful of our time with you. And these are incredible experiences and an amazing career. it would take telling somebody who's about your same age an amazing career. Like
I feel like I'm like,
I can go to hell. I'm still going. What are you talking about? But an amazing career.
but I think we got to talk. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but we got to talk about Celia.
I'd love to talk about Celia, but what I'd love to we talk about Celia, but I'd also
Because
love to
the
talk
funeral,
about
the Celia,
Rodrigo House.
okay, the Celia funeral. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we talk about that?
Yeah, let's talk
Because
about
I
it.
think
We
it's
have about 10 minutes.
Okay, I think it's important for this to talk about Celia. So I'll try to bridge it.
Sure.
Just start.
Yeah, tell me about your involvement with Celia, your relationship, but tell me specifically how you were involved with the funeral.
So I met Celia earlier in my career, working in radio, always very kind to me. When I was working at Stefan Enterprises, I remember I was in Santiago de Chile one day, and Gloria and Emilio were there, Celia and Pedro were there, Omed, her manager, we were all there. And one morning I'm having breakfast with Celia, Pedro, and Celia says to me, Bueno, Jorgito, Emilio had done one song for her, which is that song Sazón. Yo le pongo Sazón. He had done that song. She goes, coño, Emilio nunca me ha grabado un disco. Yo quiero que Pero él solo está con las muchachas bonitas, jovencitas, Shakira y Thalía. Pero yo... And I remember from that breakfast, I was going to go meet Gloria and Emilio. We were going to go to an interview. And I was up in their suite. And I said to Gloria and Emilio, I said, hey, I just had breakfast earlier with Celia. Emilio, she wants you to do an album for her. And then he goes, claro, vamos a hacerlo. Anyway, fast forward, proud to say I had nothing to do with it, but that's an album that ended up having that song, Por Si Acaso No Regreso, and some of her greatest hits were on that album. I'm proud to say I played a little role in that. But Celia was very special to me. She performed for Amigos for Kids gratis, at one of our events. She was always there, always cariñosa, she would send me, I would never forget, she would always send these Christmas cards, handwritten Christmas cards. I mean, she was such a special person. Well, fast forward, always kept in touch with her, and Pedro and Omer Pardillo, always kept in touch. And I was working at the radio station. So from the Estefans, I went to go work at the radio station that ended up becoming Univision Radio, right? And I was there for 5 years before República. While I was there, I got a call one day from Celia and Omer. And, I knew that Celia hadn't been feeling well. I didn't know much about what was up with her, but I know she had had an operation, and I learned that she had had breast cancer, right? And that the breast cancer had metastasized, and then now she had a tumor in the brain. And Celia calls me one day, and Omer puts her on the phone, and she goes, oye, Jorgito, so doctors have given me about 3 months to live. She said, and, I've been talking to Pedro and Omer, and we want you to be the one. We've thought about who we trust in Miami, and we want you to be the one to coordinate, carry out my funeral in Miami. Imagine getting that phone call. I'll never forget where I was. I was in my car on the side street of the radio station speaking to her. And I was in shock, and I remember getting very teary-eyed and saying, Celia, ¿cómo va a hacer esto? No, ahorita me han dicho, estoy bien chivada, I'm not doing well. And she said, want you to be the one to do my funeral. Imagine somebody saying that to you. It was the most surreal moment, yet such an honor, right? So she said they're giving me about 3 months. And I remember asking her after, composing myself, and I remember saying to her, Celia, I have to ask you, what is your wish, right? Because I want to make sure I honor your wish if you're giving me this privilege and honor of being the one. And she said, in her Celia way, and just speaks to, again, her humility and her humanity, she said, mira, Jorgito, cada vez que yo voy a Miami, every time I go to Miami, and I go to a funeral home, they never have parking. Cada vez que voy a una funeraria en Miami, nunca tienen parqueo. Busca una funeraria con mucho parqueo, porque yo creo que van a ir los fanáticos, so yo quiero que tengan parqueo. She said, look for a funeral home with a lot of parking, because I feel like some of my fans are going to want to go, and there's not going to be parking. So but that was Celia. She was worried about her fans, right? Little did she ever imagine the funeral that ended up, the tribute that we ended up giving her, where we were able to do it at the Freedom Tower. We had over 250,000 people go through the Freedom Tower. And then we flew her to Miami, did it all here, and then did it again in New York. Ended up doing it up at Frankie Campbell Funeral Home on the Upper East Side, then at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Fifth Avenue closed for her. FDR closed for the burial. It was truly a funeral fit for a queen, like she deserved. And I don't think she ever in her wildest dreams imagined that it was going to be the way it was. So that was really, again, as I think about my career and moments, again, that was a moment that will never happen again, but it's just ingrained in me the honor and the privilege it was to have been played a role in that. I say often that I felt like during that time I was carried by angels, because from that moment that I got that call, she ended up passing about 2 months later, and it was just a very special time. Anyway, so yeah.
That's a touching. I was at the funeral, so and yeah, it's a little teary-eyed.
It was crazy
because it was remarkable. I want to talk for just a moment
Sure.
about República Halas, but I want to just take a 2-second break to let our next interview know that we're just running a moment behind.
No worries.
I mean, it's not everything. Everybody just goes up, opens their own company, but opens up a powerhouse. So, are we speeding?
I'm rolling, yeah.
Okay. So, tell me about República Halas.
República Halas, wow. So I think I said it earlier. Louis, my business partner, and I were I was working at Univision, doing really, really well. Univision had just announced that they were going to sell Univision to 5 private equity firms. And I was 32 years old. And I remember, thinking to myself, I either stay here, and have a career here, which Ray Rodriguez was my boss at the time. He said, man, you have a career here. Do you really want to go do this? And I remember saying to him, Ray, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? I'm 32 years old. I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I was the kid with a lemonade stand outside my house when I was little, and so I always wanted to do it. I had that entrepreneurial bug in my genes, right? So I made the decision I had an employment agreement with Univision that I ended up leaving, but I gave them about 4 months notice that I was going to do this. I wasn't leaving to a competitor. I was leaving to start an agency. If anything, I was going to bring them business, right? So in November of 06, November 13th of 06, I announced that I was going to be leaving Univision. It was a shock to many. No, people didn't expect it. My team didn't expect it. I remember telling my team that day over lunch, and they were like shocked and in tears because, I had a really great thing going there. And I think if I would have stayed there, I could have continued to grow, right? But I also felt if I don't do this now, when? So Louis, my business partner, he had a shop, creative shop here in Miami called Cosmic, doing amazing work for brands. He was doing a lot of the high-end luxury real estate projects. He was doing great work. So Louis and I joined forces, and the team at Cosmic, which was about 12 people, they folded into this new entity we created called Republica. Why Republica? My dad died in April 04. After my father died, my mother found rejection letters. My dad tried getting into advertising. My dad was always a very creative guy. He wrote a book. He was a CPA, but very creative. And he tried when he was in Houston those first years, he tried getting into advertising because he was such a great writer, and he felt he could be like a bilingual copywriter. I never knew this. We found rejection letters. My father wrote to the CEO of Young and Rubicam in New York City, and we found rejection letters. So he had passed, so I never talked to my dad about this. So Louis and I are thinking of a name for the company, for the agency. And I said, and we didn't want to call it Plasencia, Casa Mayor Plasencia, we didn't want it to be about we wanted to create a brand. And I said to Louis, man, the bank where my dad worked for over 30 years that would lend money on a handshake to Cubans was called Republic National Bank. I said, how about the name Republic or República? Louis was like, man, I love that. We looked it up, it was available. And so the name was an ode to my father and the fact that, he tried getting into this industry. And I actually have I have the letter in my office framed. The rejection letter is framed right behind my desk, and that started us on this journey of República. That was in November of 06. Little did I know, I'm not an economist, that the Great Recession was going to hit. But despite the Great Recession, I'm proud to say over the years we grew. And we didn't focus on, I remember back then we just stayed razor focused. It was before social media too. So we stayed razor focused on just our business and growing, right? We didn't pay attention to the negativity and all that was going on during that time. And I'm proud to say we started winning business and accounts like Sedanos, so supermarkets that I'm proud to say we still have today. We won during that time. And we started growing República, and it grew, and we ended up becoming the number one independent multicultural agency in 2018, the same year that we merged with Havas. So we had been approached by different holding companies within our industry, to acquire us, and it never made sense. We didn't want to go somewhere where we were going to be competing with an agency kind of like ourselves. Havas didn't have an agency focused on cultural audiences, and culture. So we were able to do that with Havas and become that. And the other thing with Havas is it was going to be, instead of an acquisition, it was going to be a merger. Louis and I were going to be able to continue to stay involved, and we have. And I'm proud to say that today, 18 years later, we've worked with companies and brands like still with Sedanos, but with Walmart, with Toyota, with Google, with Diageo, with Sanofi, Merck, Pfizer. Here locally, we're now the agency, very proud to say, for Ocean Bank, where my dad worked after Republic. So we've also been able to do a lot of, we've done projects and work for a lot of our staple entrepreneurs here. We worked with Armando Codina. We worked with the Martin family of Terra Group. We've worked with Related. We've worked with, so many, with Mostec and Jose Mas when he was on Undercover Boss. We've done so many projects over the years. The other thing we've done, which I'm very proud of, is also, that thing that's ingrained in me about giving back. It's been a big part of our culture at the agency. So pro bono work has been key. All the work obviously that we do for Amigos for Kids and many other things, all pro bono. It's been important for us, to pay it forward and give back. And I'm very proud that, within the Havas world, Republica Havas is very, Havas, we're based in Paris, started in 1835, we're in 120 some countries, and Republica Havas plays a key role within Havas. And I'm proud that about a year ago, after my mom passed, I, in addition to my role as CEO of Republica Havas, I'm also now the Global Chief Client Officer for Havas Creative Network. So, Havas said, hey, we'd love for you to take on a little bit more and maybe bring some of, what you've been able to do with clients at Republica, and support some of our global clients. So I'm also working on, at the global level with Havas. So the last 18 years, entrepreneurship is not easy. It's, every day is a grind. It's blood, sweat, and tears, truly. But there's a lot of satisfaction in it. And I always tell people, if you want to go for it, if you feel like you have the bug, go for it, because the satisfaction of having your own thing, there's nothing like it. But I don't think it's for everybody. I really don't think it's for everybody, and that's fine too. Some people have been very successful careers, in corporations, as teachers, as doctors, as whatever. Fantastic, right? Entrepreneurship isn't. Today, I was having a new business meeting today, and it was a medical doctor that's built this app and this whole B2B thing. That's a medical doctor. He's a radiologist, but that's also an entrepreneur, right? That's not everybody. There's some medical doctors that are just great doctors, right? So some people have the entrepreneurial bug, others do, and others don't. It's fine if you do. It's fine if you don't. But if you do, try to go for your passion, and that's something that I'm glad I did when I was 32. I could have stayed at Univision, but I'm glad that I went off and did this because the satisfaction has been extraordinary.
My last.
Elizabeth just called me.
Yep. I think it's probably our next person's here. But I think my last question for you is.
Yes, sir.
My last question for you is: what does being Cuban American mean to you?
I'll let you finish that. Being Cuban American for me is everything. I mean, it's who I am. You know, I'm very proud and loud about who I am, my culture, and I wear it proudly anywhere I go. I speak the language, español. I, you know, keep our music, our food, our everything that goes with our culture. I keep it very much alive in me and in my day-to-day. You know, a question that I get asked often, especially when I'm outside of Miami, is your name Jorge or George? If I had $1 for every time I get asked that question. You know, and how I answer it is, you know, I'm okay with either. You know, however you feel comfortable. In Spanish, my name is Jorge. In English, my name, you know, is pronounced George. But however you feel comfortable, I'm fine with, right? And then comes the question, oh, where are you from? And I said, well, I was born here in the United States, but my family's Cuban. Oh, Cuba. There's always a romanticism around Cuba, right? Which I always find interesting. And I feel very proud of being the son and grandson of Cuban exiles. I honor them. I honor their tenacity, their grit, because we had it easy. You know, our parents and grandparents, especially my parents and grandparents, had it hard. And despite that, they didn't let anything come in their way to succeed and to work hard and to build family and to build community. You know, when I think sometimes I was born in '74, that's only 13 years after they got here. They hadn't been here that long. And what they already had, just by hard work, you know, by sheer grit and determination, I am forever indebted to my parents. I'm forever indebted to my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, and I'm very proud to be their son and to be Cuban American.
Amazing. And you're a testament to them.
Thank you.